Welcome back to Arise America. Now, we had earlier told you about the issue with Iran, the U.S. in the mix, and of course, the latest coming in from Israel. Erol Morkoc joins us now from California, USA, to discuss the Israel-Iran conflict and the U.S. being in the midst of all of this. Good to have you join us this weekend. Take us through what's happening at the negotiation level with Iran that caused a deadlock to the nuclear treaty.
Yeah, it looks like that the situation had just gotten out of hand for them. They had been given 60 days to come to the table, and on day 61, their time expired. And what has happened now is something that Donald Trump and his chiefs of staff and everybody have been deeply involved in planning for quite a long time, including the time that they were out of office. And so now Iran really needs to decide if they want to come to this negotiating table in good faith, or if they want things to continue how they are. Reports out already are showing that Trump pulled back and said, don't hit Khomeini, don't hit some of the other targets. So there still is a push for detente, but right now I think Iran is out of time, and their current escalation is not going to work well with them. The only thing in their favor is that the world doesn't want to see them destroyed, and Donald Trump wants to have peace. So, I mean, it's still a lot in the air right now, a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it's not a very clear picture, actually, of what's going on behind the scenes for a lot of people. I mean, this is very high-level classified information that nobody really is going to have a good beat on at this point.
Now, you did talk about, Trump pulling out of all of this. Isn't this better for Trump initially to have approached the United Nations and handle this dialogue that was ongoing instead of allowing an escalation and then calling on both sides to make a deal?
If that had worked before, I think it would be something that maybe you could point to, or not you specifically, but one could point to as a path of action. But we've seen yet and yet again the UN being a failed participant in the containment of nuclear proliferation. And when it comes to a state sponsor like Iran, who has declared, death to America, death to Israel, and who has allied with Russia against our allies in Ukraine and across the world, including countries like North Korea, who have much more capable propulsion systems, and you have the sharing of technologies between these countries. At some point, the UN has to be called out for what it is, which is seemingly feeble and somewhat, in certain respects, anti-Semitic organization that has been very much against Israel's position, which, while admittedly contentious, is something that is a right to self-determination. So in this case, it was a unilateral action taken by Israel, with the explicit blessing of the United States, with the tact knowledge that the Iranians, if they were to try to retaliate against anybody, it should not be against the United States directly, because that would invite us. I mean, this is a very dangerous game of chicken, but in this situation, Israel decapitated the top leadership of their army strategy and nuclear program, as well as all of their launch sites. They have no functional air force in the air. They can't get anything off the ground that's really going to be incredibly dangerous. So I think they're backed into a corner, and they'd be wise to sue for peace. And right now, Donald Trump is still keeping that door open, but we'll see if they extend the hand to. I understand if they don't. I mean, they were attacked preemptively, and they might want to escalate all the way, but that will be the end of the Ayatollah as he exists today.
Okay, I will bring this, which has been in the public space, to your attention. A lot of critics are asking, why does Iran have to sign a treaty when Israel doesn't have to, sign a nuclear non-proliferation treaty?
Yeah, I guess it's based on track record. Israel doesn't have a track record of funding and supporting terrorist organizations around the world and supplying them with drones and missiles and technological know-how and state financing behind it. Well, Israel does have an interesting role in the globe, and certainly has maybe not made many friends, and has been involved in a lot of coalition efforts. They certainly haven't been a sponsor of terrorism, where Iran has been, and they've declared openly a desire to wipe Israel off the face of the map using nuclear weapons. So I think intent right there is a big part of it, and the fact that Israel is one of our closest allies in the region, and for a long time played an incredible strategic role for the Americans, and while that role has been diminished by modern technologies, I think we have a great deal of camaraderie and friendship there, where Iran has built none. And so I think it comes down to track record and the expected result of their participation. We don't have a fear of Israel proliferating weapons to the rest of the world. We don't have a fear of France proliferating nuclear weapons to the rest of the world. We do have a fear of a modern day Iran doing so if they were given the ability.
Now, where would this go now? Where lots of people are concerned. You do know that some people are also, I mean, we're talking about civilians here losing lives, close to 180 Iran, and also quite a number in Israel. Where do we go now after Trump has clearly stated he is an Israeli ally and obviously behind, what Israel has done? Where are we headed? Because he's also saying it's time to negotiate. Is this some sort of, a push power to see with the bombing, ongoing to see that, Iran agrees to whatever it is that he's proposing?
Yes, I think this went from diplomacy in good faith to now diplomacy at the end of a rifle. Donald Trump and the coalition he has built are not going to back down from peace at any point. That's been the structural center point of this new American century they want to build. They don't want to be interventionists. They don't want to be boots on the ground, hundreds of thousands of troops. However, the very explicit direction of the Secretary of State and the President has been if Iran at all retaliates against the United States or any of our bases or anything in that region that is American, then that's an attack against us, and then we will be involved. So Iran knows right now they can only have one target, and that target needs to be Israel. And if they want to start getting creative with that, it's going to be a very dangerous situation for them. I think what this happens is if there's sensible people behind closed doors, and you can run a zero sum game in game theory, you realize you've lost this war already. The only option you have is to come to the table and work with these people because I mean right now it's a hopeless technological imbalance. They don't have a functional air force beyond a third generation fighter. These fighter jets were mostly Americans. I mean they're going to be able to shoot rockets in Tel Aviv all day, but eventually that will elicit a response from the Israelis. I think right now things are only going to escalate in the short term, but I think Iran will very quickly come to the table. I think that they're going to need to come to the table, and maybe we can have some other regional powers in that area, whether it be in Istanbul or in Riyadh, where people can maybe have a peace negotiations that have been, never came along until the threat of force was actually enacted upon. And it's sad to see, but in certain areas, force is respected, and maybe force will bring about peace in a comical reversal of logic.
Here's the thing, Erol, there are speculations now that Russia may support Iran in the coming days, being that presumably Iran is helping Russia with the weapons, talking about to fight the Ukrainian war. What are the implications for the US if Putin steps in? And can the US avoid being dragged into this Israel-Iran conflict after, much support for Netanyahu?
Yeah, it's a really delicate game, and you're very right to bring that up. I mean, Iran and Russia have been strong allies throughout the last few decades, and especially in this recent war with Ukraine. The Shahid drones have been going from Iran directly through their allies in Armenia, who is an ally of Iran, as well as Russia, in the conduit to weapons between the two countries, whether those be some of these hypersonic missiles that have probably come through Armenia into Iran, or whether it be Iranian drones that have gone through Armenia into Russia. And so this isn't a new thing for Russia to step in here. And if you zoom out as a global strategist, you can look at this battlefield and see it's two proxy countries of greater powers once again. The U.S. has always had a backing behind Israel that it's been beyond what it's put to most countries around the world, except perhaps South Korea or very few other countries that have received such level of support. In this situation, the idea would be to keep it contained, to make sure that the United States and Russia do not directly come into confrontation. I have no doubt that Vladimir Putin will offer some sort of support to Iran because they gave that support to him when he asked for it. As well, I think that those two countries are very intertwined in each other's economies, and therefore that's a guaranteed situation. Now, will that pull the U.S. in further? Well, that remains to be seen. You have a very anti-interventionist president in Donald Trump, as well as Pete Hegseth, who's very hawkish on drone strikes or targeted military attacks, but very dovish on the idea of being drawn into a forever war. And I think we've seen what happens. We've seen the devastation and failure of 25 years of that. The neocons who perpetuated that. Basically, people like Dick Cheney and those people, they were in the last election backing Kamala Harris. Those people are all out. We've replaced them with pretty level-headed people who will not escalate to a full war unless Iran was to be preemptive or try to use a tactical nuke or attack U.S. forces. And I think that would be the suicide of the rest of their existing regime, so they will not do that. And in so, I think maybe we can have a delicate balance. I think the last thing to take away is you could probably have a situation where the peace deals in Ukraine, as well as Russia and Israel, all sort of get intertwined together because Vladimir Putin is so central to all of that. Because if Putin was to pull his support from Tehran, Iran would completely collapse and there would be nothing left.
Now, let me draw your attention to, diplomatically speaking, do you think it's time for Trump to also quickly or finally strike a ceasefire deal with, Russia on the Ukraine war, plus any deal? I mean, just having that in mind, any deal that, he agrees on now with Russia may be seen as Trump accepting whatever is out there on the table for Russia.
Yeah, I think that, Putin has a lot more cards to play than any other negotiator with President Trump in any other arena, whether that mean economically or militarily. In this situation, you do have to see what the Russians are willing to put on the table. The Russians obviously are not too keen for peace. They've also lost 500,000 people. They don't exactly need to make peace on Donald Trump's terms. However, in this global game, you have a situation where Iran collapse there could trigger a further degradation of the advantage that Putin has right now. So Putin might want to sue for peace in a situation where he knows the Americans will give a little bit more to take peace off the table and at least remove one of the two hot spots from contention. I'm not sure how close we are to that. Every time we come close, we seem to think that the Russians are in good faith and they pull back, but we get closer and closer to it. Recently, I think Vladimir Putin's reaction to Iran and how he treats the Ayatollah is going to dictate how Trump is going to be able to work with this peace deal. If Putin comes out openly, very vocal and financial and military support behind Iran, it's going to scuttle the peace deals that would be potentially in Russia's interests in Ukraine, because Trump is going to have no incentive to give any visible victories. So it's going to be a lot of political gamesmanships back and forth. I think it's a very dangerous time for anybody in the region, and a lot of times in history, these have collapsed into entangling engagements that have expanded war. So we need to not only beat the historical precedent, but hope that cooler heads prevail yet again in the nuclear arsenals that, of course, are trained on each other's countries.
Thank you so much, Erol Morkoc, for joining us from California to discuss the latest on the Iran-Israel issue and, of course, U.S.